And thank you so much, Bethany. Welcome, everybody. I am excited to talk about some HR metrics using KPay today. For those of you who have come to some of our webinars previously, we did do one on more generalized reporting a little bit ago, and that is available in download documents if you want to watch that. We'll cover a few of the same things just in terms of some general reporting features, but this one is going to focus on some specific kinds of reports that we've gotten client requests for. We're going to look at some demographic analysis, some pay transparency pieces, some full-time equivalency reports, and things like that. The other thing I'll toss out here at the beginning, as Bethany mentioned, we are going to send out the recording of this training. Along with that, there are going to be some PowerPoint slides that are going to have some sample reports along with some of the settings that exist for those reports. So I know it can be difficult in these environments sometimes to try to follow along. If you try to have this on one screen and KPay on another screen, it can be sometimes challenging. But we want to give you something to refer back to. So the slides that come with will have some specific examples. And then the last thing I'll toss out is if we don't quite get to the report that you need or the metric that you track, do let us know. Either put a comment in the survey at the end and we can have somebody reach back out to you, or submit a ticket with support. I would love to get together. I love a good reporting challenge. I'm kind of a nerd and love Excel formulas and all of that. So without further ado, let me switch over to my KPay screen here and we will take a look at that. All right. So we are going to talk about metrics in KPay. I'm going to talk just for a few minutes about reporting in general, and then we'll dive into some of the specifics. For those of you who have the advanced reporting add-on, we're not really going to use that today because it is not a particularly common tool. For those of you that do not know what I'm talking about, the advanced reporting add-on lets you do things like pivot tables inside of KPay, so you don't have to export it out to Excel. You can do pivot tables natively inside the system. And there's some guided reporting as well. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's totally fine. I just wanted to clarify that we are going to stick to the basic reporting package that the majority of our clients have as we're talking about the trainings today. So couple general reporting things to get us started. First is if you haven't explored the Report Hub, I strongly encourage that. So that's going to be under your My Info, My Reports. The first option here is the Report Hub. This is a newer feature that rolled out maybe 6 months ago or so, and it brings all of your reporting together. And so this first tab, it has an overview of different kinds of reports based on popularity. Depending on which modules you have in the system, you might have a slightly different list. It also has a tab for any of your saved reports, and as well as any completed or scheduled reports. What I really like about this is for those of you who have made reports in KPay before, you know that sometimes the hardest part can be getting started. Because in KPay, every screen exists as a report essentially, and you can add and remove columns from those screens to make the report that you need. But sometimes knowing where to start can be difficult. So this list of reports here is a great inspiration. You can also search by report name here. And the feature that I really like the most is you can search by column. So if you know that you have a report that you need to include earnings in, and you aren't totally sure what reports can contain earnings, you can do a search inside of the Report Hub and it will bring back all of the reports that you can pull earnings columns into and help you find a good place to get started. So this is something that I really like as a tool. It continues to develop in terms of its flexibility, but I think it's a great place for folks trying to get started. The other thing I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go into the employee information report as an example, is just remember always to save your reports. So if you don't do a lot of reporting, under the action menu here on the right, There is an option for save view. That's going to save over your current view, or save as is going to create a copy of the report with the new information that you've made. So just like any other program, you've got save and you've got save as, but always remember to save, especially if you're doing something a little bit more complicated. This is also where you would set up if you want to share the report. So natively, the reports are only going to be visible to you as the creator. If you want to set up something that is visible to someone else, you're going to need to share it. This also includes if you want to make it visible to someone on a dashboard. So a lot of the reports that we're going to talk about today, I'm going to use a lot of charts because I find charts are a great way to sort of summarize a report. You can run a list of all of your people with, ethnicity and gender and things like that. But if you're really just looking for some demographic breakdowns, the charts are a great way to get some summaries and some subtotals without having to do a whole lot of manipulation. So if you want to put this on a dashboard or put a chart version of it on a dashboard, you do need to share it with other people or they won't be able to see it. So with that, let's dive into some specifics. I'm here on the employee information screen, and I'm actually going to start with this because this is an extremely powerful report. I think a lot of our users just sort of think of it as the general employee lookup screen, right? Like this is where you start your day a lot of times. And when you're looking up an employee, you're searching for them here, and then you're going to click to go into their record. And that's just sort of how you interact with your list of employees. But the employee information report really is just that. You can pull in a whole swath of useful things. And some of the main metric reports we get asked about are all going to come from here. So things like workforce demographics, looking at the workforce by gender or ethnicity or EEO code, that's going to come from this report. Things like pay transparency or pay analysis, looking at average salaries by job or by gender or by whatever breakdown. We're going to take a look at doing that in this report. So you can even do some turnover reporting from here. So the employee information report is a great place to start if you aren't quite sure where else to go. To that, let's add some columns to this because this is pretty basic with just username and are they active or not. Again, if you don't do a lot of reporting, it's going to be over here under your action menu, add and remove columns. You got the whole universe of columns that you can pick from here, but you can search. So there are things in here that you're entering, so they're there. So you got, gender. That's one that we get asked about a lot. I mentioned, ethnicity is one that we get asked about a lot. EEO classification, that job classification, let's throw that in there. Salary. So a word about the salary field. It's a little bit poorly named because what it really is annual base earnings. So if you are an employee who is paid a salary, then this is your annual salary. If you are reporting on an hourly employee, then the salary column is going to take their hourly wage times their annual hours to come up with an annual number. So the salary column is hugely useful for that. The opposite of that is going to be called the hourly pay column, which is going to do the same thing in reverse. If you're an hourly employee, it's going to show your hourly rate. If you are currently a salaried employee, it's going to take your annual amount and divide it by the number of hours that you have on your employee record and come up with an hourly number. But there's a lot of columns in here that you don't enter when you're setting up an employee that the system calculates that people aren't always aware of. And they're great for these metric reporting. So one of the big ones is age. The system will not only calculate the employee's age, there's also two different choices for age bands that it will automatically place employees into that you can use in your reports. So I'm going to pull those over to take a look at it. You could also report on tenure. there's two different columns depending on how you want to see the information about that. There's one called employment length. If I could spell. There we go. Length. There we go. Employment length. And there's one called days employed. So both of those are available, to you to use in reports. And we're going to talk about a couple different uses there. I'm also just going to pull in hired date and termination date, just so we have it. Okay, so I have all of this information now. My columns go out forever. Let's talk about a few of these that I mentioned, before I start putting my report together. So I talked about how the salary and the hourly fields work. So that's those. The age is going to calculate as of today. The age bands, like I say, there's two different flavors. There's age band, which is going to be in 10-year brackets starting at even years. So you can see 40 to 49, 30 to 39, et cetera. There's BLS, Bureau of Labor and Statistics age bands. This lines up with the way they report information. So they're also 10-year bands, but they start at the 5. So 25 to 34, 35 to 44, et cetera. You can use whichever one makes the most sense for your reporting. The employment length and days employed. Employment length is nice to see, but it's a little wordy, 7 years, 10 months, 4 days. It's hard to synthesize that in a report, but it's nice informational. Days employed, though, is great because then you can do math with it because it's just a number in terms of how many days they've been active. So we'll take a look at all of those. So let me start by saving this so that I've got something to go back to in case I lose my spot. Now I've got all of my employees. I could certainly take this out to Excel and do some analysis with it, but I'd really like to see how much we can do inside the system. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're not going to talk about the advanced reporting package. If you aren't sure if you have it or not, if you see this little pivot table button up here, you do. That's what this does. It lets you set up a pivot table. If you don't see that icon, then you don't. And we're going to use charts, though, to cheat our way into something like a pivot table. So I've got my list of employees. If I use this drop down here, there's an option for view data, view charts, and view charts and data. So I'm going to do view charts just to, whoops, hold on. No previews. So we're going to create a chart, and you can pick a variety of things. You can do horizontal charts, you can do pie charts, you can do a 9-box, whatever, depending on what you're analyzing. But let's just start with some basic demographic ones. So we're going to look at gender, and we're going to just do a count of gender, and we're going to have the data labels on here in a pie chart. And I hit save, and it's going to pop up my chart. Oh, some labels might be helpful. There we go. So I've got male, female, not filled in, you, whatever values you've got represented there. So it makes it really easy to grab a snapshot. You can do the same thing with, let's take a look at those age bands that we talked about. We'll just do age band. Again, we'll just do count. And so now I can see where my workforce stacks up by age, which is super helpful. And then you can start to combine these things together into more complex charts. So benefit carriers often want to know, average age of employee by gender or by department. And so that's where you can start to use, maybe I'll put a bar chart in, and we'll have one row be gender, and we'll take age as a metric, and we'll do average. And we'll plug that in. And so now I can see by those gender codes, what is the average age of my workforce? What does that look like today? So I think you can probably start to see how some of these basic demographic breakdowns are really easy to pull together. So again, you could pull in, ethnicity, EEO classification. All of that can start to fold into it. But once this employee information report is a key piece of it. The one thing I will mention, you'll notice that my create chart button is now grayed out. You are limited to 3 charts per report. So I could save this as report number 1 and then delete these charts and make new ones. But I'm just going to go ahead and remove these so that I can make some new charts from this information and talk about some different things. As we start to talk about employee data, one of the other things that's been a really hot topic lately is about pay transparency, internal pay fairness, understanding are people paid appropriately for the work that they do and fairly across the organization. And this is another great way. Again, you've got all this information inside of KPay. So how can we pull it out? Well, so I put hire date in there. What if I want to look at pay by seniority to see if people are, where I would expect on average? So I could pull together, I'm going to say I want to use their hire date and I want to group it by year. So I can see year over year, where do my wages go? I want to look at their salary and I want to see the average salary based on how long people have been in my organization. And I can really quickly throw that together and I can see, some odd divots here. I've got some of these folks, it starts to grow here over time, where, I've got longer term employees that have an average salary of, a lot less than my newer employees. That's something that you're going to want to delve into a little bit more deeply. And if you haven't used the KPay reports, let me switch so that you can see the charts and data. For those of you who aren't aware, once you get a summary going down here in the reports, if you want to delve into some information more deeply, so let's say I want to see these 2006 people and look at them a little bit more. If I click on that bar in the chart, it's going to adjust my filter so that I see just those people in the data up top. So you can use the charts to drill down into these metrics as you start to look at it. So I'm going to undo that change, go back to just my chart view so it's a little bit easier to look at. Same with, we see a lot of conversation about, pay by gender. So we'll do hourly pay on this one. Again, we'll do average. How do I break out, pay by gender? I could easily throw in additional information if I wanted to pull in by department or by state, whatever it is that is useful in terms of how I want to compare my employee groups to one another. The other kind of report I want to talk about from the employee information screen is turnover. So before we do that, I want to point out, so there are some reports under the HR menu if you have the HR module, reports and turnover. So there are some pre-built reports in terms of, turnover rates, which are great, and I encourage you to use them, but not everyone has the HR module. So if you don't have that, what kinds of options do you have available to you? And that's where, again, I love this employee information report because this is available regardless of what module you have. So you saw I pulled in, date hired and date terminated. Let's do a version of this report where I'm only showing the terminated people. Save this. And let's pull in department too, because I feel like that's probably a useful thing to have. So then I can start to pull together, even without using the HR module, what if I wanted to see, based on departments, I want to see the average days employed. How long are my employees staying by department when they terminate? Oh, let's get some numbers on here. There we go. So days is maybe not the ideal metric, years would be nicer. But since days employed is a standard item that we can pull in here without having to do any custom columns or anything complicated like that, I like to do things as much out of the box as we can manage on some of these. So it still gives you a great view of, the marketing people seem to last a really long time, the manufacturing people, not so much. And again, if I want to delve into the specifics, I can click into a specific row, go back to so I can see charts and data. I can see those specific terms, and look at what we're seeing in terms of detail. So the employee information report is awesome. The last trick I want to show you with the employee information report in terms of metrics that we get somewhat regularly requests for is tell me how many people I had active on a specific date, or tell me how many people worked for me, in total last year. So again, if you have the HR module, there are some pre-built reports that I like to point out. There's a headcount report that is called employee headcount, and it gives a breakdown for, you can pick a specific date, and it will show you by status how many people are active, how many people are terminated. So this is a great one if you need a snapshot as of one date and you have the HR module. But again, if you don't have the HR module, or if you're trying to find out how many people did I employ in the third quarter of 2022 total, whether they're here today or not, how do I pull that information out? And so we're going to look at some unique filters on this one. So I'm going to clear out my terminated filters so I get all of my employees from forever. Let's save this as all. Oh, wait, hold on. I got to get back to a version with, there we go, with all of my term dates. Okay. So we're going to do some advanced filtering. So if you've taken any of my reports trainings before, I've talked about these inline filters, but you can also filter using this button up here. And the column filter basically mirrors what those inline filters are at the top of the column. This custom tab, though, is magical. And I'm going to show you an example here in just a second. And this is one specifically where do feel reassured that I'm going to have this exact screenshot in the handouts later. So, but what the custom filter lets you do is it lets you build complex rules with and or logic. So if I wanted to see everyone who was employed fourth quarter 2022, so let's do that. So I'm going to look at hire date. So obviously they're going to have been hired prior to 12/31/2022. Okay. Then I want to add another operator here. Whoops. Let me move that down. I want them to still be here. So I want their termination date to be null. So this is going to get my people who were hired before 12/31/2022, and their termination date is empty, so they're still here. But what about the people who are not here anymore? So that's where I need another set of logic, and that's where this hierarchy comes into play. So I can put another option down here. Whoops, there we go. Let me delete that. So I still want people who were hired prior to, whoops. So if I'm looking at Q4, I actually need people who were hired prior to 10/1/2022, right? Let's go change that. But I want people whose termination dates is going to be after 12/31/2022. And I want either this group or this other group. So I want people who were hired before October and are still here. I want people who were hired before October and left after December. And so then when I apply that to my report, oh, I messed it up. Hold on. Oh, I've got my greater than, less than symbols going backwards. I've got to fix that up. So, but what this will let you do then is, there we go. So then it pulls out any people who fit both of those parameters. So this custom filter lets you do things that are a lot more complex than the inline filtering, because if you were going to use the inline filters, you'd have to do this as two separate reports, because you would have to have a date hired filter and then one for the people that are still active and a separate date hired filter for those that are terminated, right? So using this custom filter allows you to put more complicated rules in place and use those on your reports. So don't forget that that's there. Take advantage of it. All right. So I've talked a lot about the employee information report. I'm going to talk about a few other reports here that are great baselines for some other things. The next one I'm going to look at is the calculated time report. So this will only exist if you have timekeeping, but it is super valuable for those that use it. So it's under team time reports, calculated time summary. And one of the things that I want to use this report for is we get a lot of requests, especially as companies start to come up to 50 employees and they need to evaluate whether they have to file for ACA. How many full-time equivalent employees did I have last year? We get a lot of requests for that. Or helping to budget for next year. How many full-time equivalents do I use? Maybe I need more people because I'm overutilizing my part-time employees. This is a great report to get to that. So first, let me clean this up a little bit. I'm going to take out, I need overtime and regular. We'll get rid of some of these other ones that we don't really need. So I've got my overtime and I've got my regular pay. You may have a counter called total worked, which would definitely simplify this, but I'm going to show you what you can do with a custom column. And again, this specific example will be in the slides, so you don't have to try to write too much down. But for those of you who are comfortable in Excel, the custom columns open a lot of doors in terms of metrics. So when you're going to add and remove column, you can click Manage Columns. And here you see all of these functions. And if you do formulas in Excel, if, min, max, these are going to look really familiar. So what we can do with this is I'm going to take from my column menu, this shows me all of the things that I can put in the report. So if I'm looking for hours, let's see. Hours, no, not hours, what are they called? Find the one that I'm looking for. Counter, there we go. So I want my counter for regular pay. And I want to add that to my counter for weekly overtime. I'm going to put function right here just to make sure that it comes out as a number. Oops. Have to give it a name. And so now I've got a column here that's doing math for me. Okay. And then as we start to look at full-time equivalency, for example, we can build on that. So for example, if I wanted to say, I want to take this amount, this total hours worked, and I want to divide it by 120, because if we're talking about ACA full-time equivalency, that's 30 hours per week. So this is going to be a month's worth. I'm going to apply that. I'm going to say that I'm going to run the report for last month. Whoops. It's like those math problems on the internet. There we go. So now it's taking their total hours worked for the month. It's dividing it by 120 hours, and it's giving me that full-time equivalency for that individual. If I want to get a quick summary, I can make sure that set to numeric and hit sum, and then it'll give me my total at the bottom. So I know for this month, I had 12 full-time equivalent employees, even though I had 28 people who were working. So this is another great metric to keep an eye out, because a lot of regulations are going to depend on your full-time equivalents. You could even go further with the custom column if you wanted to, say, exclude salaried people, or if cases like this person where they're working a lot of overtime, maybe you don't want any numbers greater than 1. Maybe we only want it's 1 or a number smaller than 1. So depending on your specific use case, the custom columns become really important for evaluating that. So we've got a few examples of that we're going to send out as well, but that one's a great one. The other key employee reports that we get asked about a lot that I'm going to talk about are a little bit more module specific. So the first one is time to hire. So if you are using the applicant tracking module, the time to hire reporting is super important in understanding how efficient your recruiting program is. There is a pre-built report for that. So under recruitment and reports, it's actually the only report that lives out there natively in the system. There is a time to hire report. What this is going to do is it's going to take the amount of time from the date the position was created. It's going to show you both how long the posting was open and how long it took to hire an applicant into that role. There are a few things to know, though, in that you need to make sure that you are using the hire button inside. Oops, let me go to an active rec here. There we go. You have to make sure that you are using the hire button on the applicant so that the system knows that you have hired someone. If you are not using that portion of the applicant tracking, the time to hire report is not going to populate correctly. And again, you can break it out by whatever other filters you need, but that's one that's huge. The other one that we get asked about a lot is employee satisfaction or employee engagement. And I think a lot of people do surveys through SurveyMonkey or some other tool, but I do want to make sure that you're aware that if you are using the HR module, there is a survey tool inside of KPay. And there are pre-built employee engagement surveys that you can just use. So you can come out here and say, I want to do an employee, a weekly impulse survey, or I want to do a management effectiveness survey. And you can bring those in. They will come pre-populated with questions that you can customize. And then after employees complete those, you have the ability to both see the specific answers as well as break down all of the statistics, again, by, let's pick a specific survey here that I've got, by all of your cost center information. So again, if you want to get your survey results by department, by supervisor, by location, since all of that already exists in KPay, the ability to do employee engagement surveys and break it down by all of those key demographic details becomes really simple. And then the last metric I'm going to talk about that we help a lot with reporting on is around attendance and schedule adherence. So if you are using the timekeeping module, even if you do not use the advanced scheduler module, if you use the basic scheduler module, there is a report called exceptions. And let's go. It's under time reports, time allocation. And so what this is going to do is it will show you any exceptions that you've built in the system. If you are using schedules, you can get late, you can get left early, you can get tardies, you can get absence reports. Even if you are not using the schedules, you can have the exceptions pull things like short lunch or long lunch, because the system can look for variations in schedule and report those back. So again, this is one that's going to be a bit depending on how you're using the modules. But do keep in mind that there are some great tools around time tracking, not just in terms of hours worked, but in terms of hours not worked, that can help you monitor that for your employees. So that's going to bring my presentation to a close today. I know, if you've been asking questions, I'd be happy to field some here. As I say, if you've got some specific reporting requirements, put in a ticket with support and either somebody there can help you or I can get on the phone. I would love to really help you get this information you need out of the system. Every company uses some slightly different metrics, but hopefully this presentation gave you some ideas of what is easy to pull out of KPay and some ways to do it. Having HR and time and payroll all combined together into one platform really opens the doors for some exciting reports. And so we'd love to help you, dig in and get that information out. So with that, Bethany, do we have any questions that we want to field today?
Yeah, thanks, Micah. We did have one in here. Like you said, feel free to throw those questions in the chat, or there will be a survey that we'll send out afterwards. Feel free to submit any questions there as well. Micah, the one that we got, what happens if we don't see the custom filter option?
On the employee information report, so I would say, so there's two things. One, this custom filter this tab doesn't exist on every report. So if you don't see it on some reports, that might be normal. If you don't see it on the employee information report, is one that it should absolutely be there for. Reach out to support, because that's probably a permissions issue that we need to sort out on your account.
Okay, great, thank you. And that's all I'm seeing come in here live, Micah. I'll let you go ahead and close up.
All right, that sounds great. Like I say, I think that, I would love to help you with some specific reporting questions. If you have them, let us know how we can be of assistance in getting the information that you need out of the system. And have a great day. Thanks everybody for spending some time with me this afternoon.